"Move," the boy said to me. "I want to stand where you're standing." And when I did not move, he put the flat of his hand against my chest and pushed, the way a child pushes a door he assumes will open. I had stood the inner colonnade of the Hall of Treaties for 11 years by then, and I had learned every kind of push a man can give you. There is the accidental push of a crowd, which is no insult. There is the testing push of a fool, which is half a question. And there is this one, the push of a young man who has decided in advance that nothing he does to you will cost him anything, because he believes he carries a thing called immunity, and that it covers his manners as well as his person. He was wrong about that. He was wrong in a way that would take him the whole of one long evening to understand, and I can tell you now, 11 years older still and retired from the post, that I would not trade that evening for any other I stood. But let me set it where it happened, because the place is half the story. The state I served is gone from no map but the one I am inventing, so call it Callanmore and call its seat Renholt Court, and understand that on the night I mean, the court was not itself. For 3 days it had belonged, by every courtesy a host can extend, to the delegation of Sarvan, a proud margravate across the eastern water, old in pride and older in grievance, come at last to sign the river treaty that 2 generations of soldiers had bled over and 2 generations of clerks had failed to write. The Hall of Treaties had been opened, its long table polished to a black mirror, its 100 lamps lit, its galleries hung with the banners of both houses so that no man could say his own colors were not honored. I stood at the joint of the inner colonnade where the public hall met the private stair, in full ceremonial the deep crimson tunic of the hall guard, the tall black bearskin, white gloves, the regimental sash, the rifle at order arms by my right boot. My orders were the simplest in the building and the hardest. Hold the line of the stair. Let no one pass who has not the marshal's token. Do not speak. Do not move. Be the wall that tells every guest without a word that some things in this house are not for the taking. The boy had been told all of this. I know he had, because his own father told it to him in my hearing on the first night, kindly, the way a tired man tells a thing he has told too often. His name, I will give him a name since he gave me none, was Lucan. He was 19, perhaps 20, the only son of Sarvan's ambassador, a grave and careful man named Dorrant who had spent 30 years learning exactly how much he could ask of another nation and exactly how to ask it. Whatever the father had spent 30 years building in himself, the son had spent 20 years certain he had inherited without the building. He moved through Renholt as though it had been swept and lit and warmed for him alone. On the first night, he took a goblet from a server's tray before the toast and drank it down and laughed when the man flinched. On the second, he climbed the dais where only the 2 heads of state would sit, and sat in the host's chair, and had his likeness sketched there by a friend, and would not come down until the marshal asked him 3 times. Each time, a careful adult of his own party untangled it quietly, smiling the smile you smile when you cannot afford not to, and each time the boy learned the only lesson that ground was teaching him, that there was no floor, that the smiling would always come. That immunity, the word he had heard all his life around his father's table, was a kind of weather that traveled with him and made the rules go soft wherever he stood. I watched all of it from the joint of the colonnade and said nothing, and moved not at all because that was my post. And I will be honest with you, in the way you can only be honest about a thing years later. I did not like him. A guardsman is allowed not to like a man. He is only not allowed to let it show, and he is not allowed to let it move him, and those are very different disciplines, and the second is the harder. On the third night, the night of the great reception, the eve of the signing, the boy found me. I think he had been looking. A man who has met no floor anywhere begins, after a while, to go hunting for one, though he would never call it that. He had charmed the easy people and bored the hard ones, and now he wanted a thing that would not bend, so that he could feel himself bend it. And there I was at the joint of the stair, crimson and black and white and utterly still, holding a line he was forbidden to cross, the most bendable-looking unbending thing in the building. A statue with a pulse. Of course, he came to me. He came with an audience, which is the first thing you learn to count. 3 of his own age behind him, glasses in hand, and beyond them the wider room, 50, 60 guests of both nations, the ambassadors, the marshal's people, a knot of Sarvan's senior delegation near the cold hearth. The boy planted himself in front of me at arm's length, tilted his head, and looked me up and down the way you'd price a horse. "You're not allowed to move, are they?" he said to his friends, not to me. "Not at all. You could light a fire under them. It's the whole joke of the thing." I held my eyes on the middle distance, on a banner across the hall, the way I had held them for 11 years. "Hello," he said, closer now, waving a hand a few inches from my face. "Anyone home?" "Knock, knock." His friends laughed the laugh that is half nerves. "My father owns half the water you people drink. Did you know that? After tomorrow he'll own the bridges too." He leaned in until I could smell the wine. "Which makes you more or less mine, so move. I want to stand where you're standing. I want to see the room from the statue's eyes." And when I did not move, he put the flat of his hand against my chest and pushed. It was not a hard push. I want to be exact about that, because everything that came after turned on exactness. It was not the shove of a man trying to knock another man down. It was worse, in a way. It was the push of a man who did not believe there was another man there at all. He pushed me the way you'd push the statue to see if it was bolted down, with a little grin, already turning to his friends to share the result. I did not move. 11 years had built the not moving into me the way the river builds the bank, grain on grain, until the holding is not a thing you decide but a thing you are. The push spent itself against the wall I had made of myself and came to nothing, and the boy's grin slipped only a little, only for an instant, because the result he had expected, the small, satisfying give, had not come. So he pushed again, harder with both hands. And that, though neither of us knew it yet, was the moment the floor he had been hunting all evening finally rose up under him. Not where he was looking, not under his feet, but behind his shoulder, in the silence at the cold hearth where the senior people of his own nation had just gone very, very still. Here is a thing they teach you in the first month at the hall, and it took me years to truly understand. They teach you that you are not the most important thing at your post. The line is. You are only the means by which the line holds. So when a man lays hands on you, the question in your head is never, "What has he done to me?" Your pride is not on the duty roster. The question is, what has he done to the line? And what does the line require? And almost always the line requires exactly what it required the moment before, that you hold it, and that you do not become the second story in the room. Because the day a guardsman of the hall strikes a guest, even a guest who struck him first, the line is broken whether the guest falls or not, and broken by you. I knew all of that with the second push the way I knew my own name, so I gave him nothing. Not a flinch, not a glance, not the smallest tightening of the jaw that would let him feel he had reached me. I let the second push spend itself as the first had, and I kept my eyes on the banner across the hall, and I stood the line. But a post is not only a wall. A post is also a pair of eyes, and a pair of eyes that has watched one doorway for 11 years sees a great deal without ever appearing to look at anything. So while I stood, I read the room. I read the boy first, because he was the nearest weather. He had not gotten his give, and a man who has never met a floor does not know how to stop when the floor refuses to give. He laughed again, too loud, to cover the place where his certainty had cracked, and he said something to his friends about Callanmore making its servants out of stone because flesh was too expensive, and the friends laughed because they were 19 and frightened, and it was the only thing to do. Then he turned back to me, and I saw the new thing come into his face, the thing that is the most dangerous thing a proud young man can feel, more dangerous than anger. He was embarrassed. He had performed the bending of the statue for his audience, and the statue had refused to be bent, and now the audience had seen him fail at the one trick he had promised. So he would have to do something larger, he would have to win. That is the law of the ladder, and every guardsman learns to read it. Mockery climbs. It goes from words to gestures, from gestures to the first light touch, from the touch to the harder touch, and at every rung the man tells himself he will stop, and at every rung he does not, because stopping now would mean admitting the rung before was already too far. The boy was 3 rungs up and climbing, and I have watched enough men climb that ladder to know there is only one way it ends if no one takes the ladder away. It ends at the rung that is a crime, and the climber is always astonished to arrive there, because he was only ever taking one small step at a time. So while I held, I read the second thing, the more important thing. I read the room behind him. His 3 friends had stopped laughing. One of them, a girl with sense in her face, had put a hand on his sleeve and said his name low, and he had shaken it off. Behind them, the wider room had begun to do the thing a room does when it understands, before any words are said, that a line has been crossed. It had begun to fall quiet in patches, conversations dying out from the center where he stood and rippling toward the walls. And at the cold hearth, where the senior people of Sarvan stood, the men and women who had crossed the eastern water not to play, but to win a treaty their grandfathers had died for, every face had turned, and not one of them was smiling the smile. I knew those faces, in the way you come to know the faces of a delegation you have guarded for 3 days. The tall, white-haired woman was the Lady Vase, who held the Margravine seal and spoke for her in the room, the second most powerful person Sarvan had sent, and the most dangerous, because she had spent her life learning the price of every gesture in a hall like this one. Beside her stood 2 of the senior negotiators, the men who would put their hands to the river treaty in the morning. And a little apart from them, just come in from the gallery and stopped dead 3 steps inside the door, stood the boy's father. I had guarded Ambassador Dorrant for 3 days, and I had watched him be, in every hour of it, the most careful man in any room. He weighed his words like a jeweler weighs stones. He never once raised his voice or his hand or his expectations beyond what the moment could bear. And I understood, watching him cross 30 years of careful diplomacy in a single look at his son's hand on a host soldier's chest, that whatever the boy had inherited, it had not come from the man now standing white-faced in the doorway. The father had built himself. The son had assumed the building came free. And the father knew, in that one look, exactly what it was about to cost, not the boy, who still understood nothing, but Sarvan in the hall in the morning, in front of the only people who mattered. Because here is what the boy did not know, and what his father knew to the bone, and what I knew because 11 years at the joint of that stair had taught me to feel the weight of a room the way a sailor feels the weather. A state visit is not a holiday. It is a ledger. Every courtesy is an entry, every slight is an entry, and at the end the 2 nations add up the columns and decide what they are to each other. The boy had treated 3 days of the most carefully balanced courtesy 2 peoples had ever extended each other as his own private playground. And now, on the eve of the signing, in front of the woman who held his sovereign seal, he had laid hands twice on a soldier of the host nation at his post in the host nation's most sacred hall. He thought he had pushed a statue. He had, in fact, just written a very large entry in a ledger he did not know existed, in ink that does not wash out, and the whole of his own delegation had watched him do it. The marshal would come now. I knew it before I saw him. There is a particular quality to the quiet that falls just before authority arrives in a hall like that, a tightening, as though the room were holding its breath for someone, and I felt it tighten now. Somewhere behind me, on the private stair I was holding, a measured tread had started down. The boy felt none of it. He had his back to all of it. He saw only the statue that had refused him twice, and his own friends watching him fail, and the unbearable need to turn the failure into a victory before anyone could be sure it was a failure. So he did the thing I had known, 3 rungs ago, that he would eventually do. He reached up, with a grin he no longer felt, and he flicked the chin strap of my bearskin with 2 fingers. And then, when even that got him nothing, he took hold of the front of my crimson tunic with his fist, the regimental sash and all, and he pulled hard, trying to haul the statue a single step off its line so that he could say, to his friends and his future and the whole indifferent world, that he had moved the man who could not be moved. And I felt the seam of the tunic give at the shoulder with a sound like a small, clean tearing, and I thought, with the strange calm that comes down over you in the last second before everything changes, there it is, the top of the ladder, the rung that is a crime. And he doesn't even know he's reached it. Now I want to tell you exactly what I did, because it is the smallest thing in this story and the most important, and if you take nothing else from an old guardsman, take this. I did nothing. I had a rifle at order arms by my right boot, and I had 2 good hands, and I had 11 years of drill in my arms that could have put that boy on the marble in less time than it takes to read this sentence, and not one man in that hall would have blamed me. He had laid hands on me twice and was now hauling at my coat hard enough to tear it. The whole room was waiting to see the statue finally break, and a part of me, the small, ungoverned part that lives in every man, wanted to give it to them. I will not pretend otherwise. For half a heartbeat, with his fist in my torn coat and his wine breath in my face, I wanted to take his wrist and fold it the way the drill yard had taught me 100 winter mornings, and watch the certainty leave his face all at once. But I have told you the law of my post. The day a guardsman of the hall strikes a guest, the line is broken by the guardsman, and there is a second law underneath it, harder and truer. The strength of my regiment was never that we could not be touched. We could. A foolish boy was proving it. The strength was that when we were touched, we did not break, and the not breaking was the louder thing, and the longer lasting, and the only one of the two that the years would keep. So I let him pull. I set my weight low into the stone the way the drill yard taught, so that his haul moved nothing, and I let the failure of it travel back up his own arm, and I kept my eyes on the banner across the hall, and I did not so much as look at him. I gave him a torn coat and not one thing more. I made of his crime a thing he committed entirely alone, against a man who had done nothing at all but stand where he was placed, and I let the whole room, and the whole of his own nation, see it written that way. That was when the measured tread on the private stair behind me reached the bottom step, and the Marshal of Renholt came through the line I was holding, and the boy's evening, the real one, began. The Marshal of the court was a spare gray man named Oswin Reeves, who had held the white staff of the household for longer than I had held my post, and who had in that time learned to move through a crisis the way water moves through a crack, without hurry, without heat, and without anything in his path being able to stop him. He did not run. Men of real authority never run. Running tells a room that the man in charge is afraid, and a room that thinks the man in charge is afraid will do anything. He came down the last step at his ordinary walk, and he crossed to the joint of the colonnade at his ordinary walk, and the simple fact of his unhurried coming did more to quiet that hall than any shout could have done. He stopped an arm's length from the boy. He looked first and only at me. "Are you injured, Trooper Crane?" he asked. "Not what happened. Not what is going on here." He asked after the soldier first in front of everyone, and I understood why even as he did it. It told the whole room in 5 words who in this picture was the wronged man and who was the wrong. It set the story straight before a single argument could be made. "No, sir," I said. It was the first word I had spoken in 3 days on that post. My voice came out level, which I was grateful for. The marshal nodded once, and only then did he turn his gray eyes on the boy, and on the fist still knotted in my torn coat. "Take your hand off my sentry," he said. He did not raise his voice. He did not have to. There are men who can make a quiet sentence land in a hall like a dropped stone, and Reeves was one of them. The boy let go as though the coat had grown hot. The grin was entirely gone now. For the first time all evening, in the space of one quiet sentence from a gray old man with a white stick, Lucan of Sarven had understood that the floor he had been hunting all night had been there the whole time, under everything, holding up the smiling, and that he had just stepped through it. He tried, of course. They always try when the floor first gives. It is a kind of reflex. It was a joke, he said. He doesn't even move, it's a statue. Everyone does it, I barely. He looked around for his audience and found it had become a jury. My father is the ambassador of Sarvan. I have immunity, you can't. You have immunity from arrest, the marshal said in the same even voice, by the laws of nations, and no man here will lay a finger on you, and no constable will come for you, and you will not spend 1 hour of this night in a cell. On that you are entirely correct. He let it sit a moment, and the boy's shoulders came down half an inch in relief, and that, I think, was the cruelest second of the whole evening for him, because the marshal had given him the relief on purpose, so that he would feel the full distance of the fall when the rest came. You have immunity from arrest, Reeves said again. You imagined it covered your manners as well. It does not. No law on earth has ever made a man's rudeness another man's duty to endure. And there is no immunity, young sir, in any treaty ever signed, from the consequence of having shown your whole nation, in the house of the people they came to make peace with, exactly what you are. The boy opened his mouth, and then a voice came from the cold hearth, low and clear and final, and the boy shut it again, because it was a voice he had spent his whole life obeying without knowing he obeyed it. Lucan, said the lady vase, come here. I have stood near a good deal of power in my life, the way a doorpost stands near the weather, and I have learned that the realest of it is the quietest. The lady vase did not cross the hall to her ambassador's son. She did not have to. She stood at the cold hearth with the Margravine seal at her breast, and she said 2 words and a name, and the boy went to her across the marble through the silence of 60 people, the way a much smaller boy goes to a much sterner room, and the going was the first true punishment of his life, and everyone watched him take it. She let him stand in front of her a moment. Then she said, not lowering her voice at all, so that the whole hall and both nations would hear it, and there could be no later argument about what had been said. You laid your hand on a soldier of the host, at his post, in their treaty hall on the eve of the signing, twice, and then you tore his coat trying to drag him off his ground because he would not perform for you. She paused. Do you have any idea what you have done? It was a joke, the boy said again, but smaller now, the word coming apart in his mouth. Everyone, their statues, it's a thing people do. It is a thing tourists do at a railing, the lady vase said, and it is a fool's game even there. But you are not a tourist at a railing. You are the son of the ambassador of Sarvan, standing under our own banner. In the house of the people, we have come to ask to trust us with the bridges over a river 2 armies died for. And tonight every soul in this hall watched a son of our delegation treat their soldier as a toy and their hall as his playground, and watch that soldier stand and take it without lifting a hand, which means that tomorrow morning, when the Margravine's people sit down across that table to argue that Sarvan can be trusted to keep a treaty, the answer already sitting in every Callanmore mind in this room will be, we saw how your people behave in a house they were only visiting. She let that land. You did not push a statue, Lucan. You put your whole nation's good faith on a scale tonight, and you weighed it in front of the very people who decide what it is worth, and it came up light. The boy looked then for the one ally a son always looks for. He looked for his father. I will remember Ambassador Dorrant's face that night until they bury me. He had come 3 steps into the hall and stopped, and he had not moved since, and in his stillness, a different stillness from mine, a man's stillness and not a soldier's, I saw the whole of 30 careful years come up against a thing that no care could undo. He was not angry. That is what I remember. A lesser father would have been angry, would have made a noise to show the room that he disapproved, would have spent his son's disgrace to buy back a little of his own standing. Dorrant did none of that. He crossed the marble slowly, and he stopped beside his son, and for one moment he looked at the boy, and the boy, finding no rescue there, finally, fully, understood, And then the ambassador turned away from his son entirely and walked to me. And then the ambassador of Sarvan, the second most careful man in the Eastern world, did the thing I have never forgotten, the thing that turned the whole evening from a humbling into something larger than a humbling. He stood in front of me, a soldier of a foreign household, at my post, with 60 people watching and the Margravine seal not 10 feet away, and he bowed to me. Not the small inclination of the head that one important man gives another. A real bow, from the waist, the bow a man gives when he is spending his own dignity on purpose to buy back something his blood has broken. "I am Doran," he said, straightening. "I speak for Sarvan in this house. What my son did to you was without excuse, and I will not offer one. You stood your post and did your duty and were used badly for it in my nation's name, and I am ashamed before you." He drew a breath. "Your coat is torn. I will see it replaced, and I will see it done by my own hand and not my purse, so that I do not insult you twice by treating an injury to your honor as a thing that money settles. And I will say to your marshal, and to your sovereign if I am permitted, that I have never in 30 years been better served by a man's restraint than I was tonight by yours. For if you had struck my son, as you had every right to do, you would have ended a treaty 2 generations bled for, and you knew it, and you held. I owe you the river, trooper. I will not forget it." I did not know what to do. There is no drill for being bowed to. So I did the only thing I had, which was the thing I had been doing all night. I held my post. I kept my eyes forward, and I said, "I was at my post, sir." That's all it was, because it was true, and because a man who has just been given his honor back does not haggle over it. But the Marshal of Renholt heard it, and the Lady Vase heard it, and I think it was that, the soldier refusing to be made the hero of his own restraint, that decided the last of what came next, because the consequence the boy had earned was not yet finished. It had, in fact, barely begun. The arrest he could not suffer, the cell he would never see, those were gone by the law of nations. But there is more than one kind of consequence, and the quietest kind is the one that lasts. The Lady Vase turned to the boy a last time. And what she said in the plain hearing of both delegations, because a consequence that is hidden teaches nobody. "You came to Renholt as a member of this delegation," she said. "That was an honor, and you have shown tonight that you did not understand it was one, so you will not sign tomorrow." The boy started. I think he had not known he was to have a place at the signing at all, but he knew now what it was to lose one. "You will not stand at the table. You will not stand in the gallery among the delegation. You will stand at the back of the hall, behind the rope, with the public, among the very people you spent 3 days mistaking yourself for the better of, and you will watch your nation put its name to a piece your grandfather's grandfather wanted, and you will know that you very nearly cost us, and that you did not help. And in the morning after you will go home, alone, by the early boat, before the feast. You will not be present for the one good day this delegation came across the water to have, because you could not be trusted to behave at the party the night before." She paused, and the last of it she said more quietly, but no one in that hall missed it. "And when you are home, you will write to this soldier, not to apologize, your father has done that for the nation, and I will not have you cheapen it. You will write to him to tell him what you learned. And you will not be permitted to return to any house Sarvan is a guest in any nation until you can. That is not a punishment, Lucan. It is the floor. You have been looking for it all your life. I am sorry no one gave it to you sooner." I have thought about that last line a great many times in the years since. I am sorry no one gave it to you sooner. There was no triumph in how she said it. There was something almost like grief in it. The grief of an old hand looking at a wasted young one, and seeing exactly how the waste was made, by 1,000 small smilings, 1,000 untanglings, 1,000 grown people deciding it was easier to make the rules go soft than to make the boy go straight. She was not only sentencing him. She was naming, out loud, the long and gentle failure that had built him, and she was ending it here in a foreign hall at the cost of one bad evening, before it could build something worse. And the boy, I watched him hear it. Whatever else I think of how Lucan of Sarvan began that night, I will give him this. He heard it. The need to win, which had driven him up the whole ladder, went out of his face all at once, the way a fire goes out when the air is taken from it. And what was left underneath was very young and very frightened, and for the first time all evening awake. He did not argue. He did not appeal to his father, who would not have helped him, or to immunity, which had just been measured to the inch and found to cover so much less than he had believed. He stood in the silence of two nations, and he took the whole of it. And when the Lady Vase had finished, he said, in a voice I had not heard him use before, the only thing there was to say, "Yes, my lady." And then turning to me with his father standing beside him and the room watching, he said it again, smaller and only to me, "I'm sorry." I didn't, and he stopped, because the rest of the sentence was, "I didn't think you were really a person," and even he could hear how it would sound, and the stopping was the truest thing he had said all night. I gave him a soldier's nod. It was all I had to give, and at my post it was a great deal. Then the marshal's people came, quiet and certain, and the evening folded itself back up the way a well-run house folds up a spill before the guests can dwell on it. The galleries filled their talk back in. The lamps burned on. And I stood the rest of my watch at the joint of the colonnade, in my torn crimson coat, and held the line, because the line still wanted holding, and that was still the most important thing in the building. The signing went forward the next morning. I was not in the Hall of Treaties for it. My watch had ended at the turn of the night, and a sentry stands where he is placed, not where the history is. But the men who were there told me of it afterward, and I have no reason to doubt them, because the man at the center of the telling behaved, by every account, exactly as I would have expected him to. They told me the boy stood at the back of the hall, behind the rope among the public, for the whole of the long ceremony. They told me he did not slouch and did not whisper and did not once try to be noticed. They told me that when the two heads of state put their names to the river treaty, and the hall rose to its feet, Lucan of Sarvan rose with the strangers behind the rope and stood at something very near attention, and that more than one person who had watched him the night before watched him then, and saw the difference, and said nothing, because some lessons are best left to do their work in silence. And they told me one thing more, which I have kept all these years like a stone in a pocket. They told me that before the boy went down to the early boat, alone in the gray of the morning, he asked a marshal's man where the soldier from the night before would be, the one whose coat he had torn. And the marshal's man, who had his orders, told him the soldier was off duty and could not be disturbed, which was true. And the boy nodded, and he did not push it, which would have been the old Lucan's move, to push until the rule went soft. He only asked instead that a thing be given to me, and he gave the man a folded square of paper, and then he went down to the water and home. I have the paper still. It is the shortest letter I have ever been written and the one I have kept longest. It does not apologize. He had been told not to, and he obeyed, which was itself a kind of growing. It says only this, in a careful hand. I thought immunity meant the rules did not touch me. You showed me, without saying one word, that the rules I most needed were the ones I had been breaking in myself. You held your post. I am going to learn to hold something too, and then his name and nothing else. The new coat came a month later, across the eastern water, with a letter from the ambassador. He had not in the end sewn it by his own hand. A man cannot tailor a regimental tunic across an ocean, and we both knew the offer had been the spirit and not the letter. But he had paid for it out of his own purse and not his nation's, and he had written to my marshal and to my sovereign, as he had said he would, every word of it. My sovereign, I was told, read the ambassador's account aloud to the household, and then said that he had a guard who could keep a treaty by keeping still, and that he would rather have one such man at a door than 100 clever ones at a table. I did not hear him say it. A guardsman seldom hears the good said of him. It travels by other roads. But I believe it was said, because 3 weeks after that they moved me to the king's own stair, which is the post you are given when the household has decided it can trust you with the things that cannot be replaced. I stood it for 9 more years. I never again had my coat torn. I have told this story a good many times in a good many quiet rooms to young soldiers about to take their first ceremonial post and frightened, most of them, not of the cold or the long hours, but of exactly the thing that happened to me that night, of the man who will come, sooner or later, to every still soldier at every rope and railing and gate, the man who has decided that nothing he does to you will cost him anything, and who pushes to see if it is true. And every time I tell it, a young one asks me the same question, and it is always the same, and it is the wrong question, and I am always glad to be asked it so that I can give the right answer. They ask me, "Weren't you angry? Didn't you want to make him pay?" And I tell them what I have told you. I tell them that the small, ungoverned part of me wanted to, for half a heartbeat, and that I am not ashamed of having wanted it, because wanting it and doing it are different countries and the whole of a soldier's discipline lives on the border between them. And then I tell them the thing that took me 11 years to understand and that I am trying to give them in an evening, that I did not make him pay. I could not have. A torn coat is cheap, and a bruised wrist is cheaper, and either would have cost me the only thing of value in that hall, which was the line, and would have handed the boy the one gift he was hunting all night, the proof that the statue was only a man after all and could be broken like any other. I did not make him pay. I stood still and let the world he had never been shown rise up and meet him, and it cost him more than any blow I could have struck, because it was true, and it lasted, and it changed him, and a blow does none of those things. That is the whole of what I know, after 20 years of standing at one door or another while the powerful and the careless went by. The strength was never that we could not be touched. We could. A foolish boy proved it and tore my coat to do it. The strength was that when he touched me, I did not break, and that the not breaking said, louder than any answer I could have given him, that some things in that house and in that soldier were simply not for the taking, no matter whose son you were or what you imagined you carried. He thought he had immunity from the rules. What he learned, at the joint of a colonnade in a country not his own, with his coat-tearing hand still open and empty, was that the only immunity any man ever truly has is the discipline he builds in himself, and that he had none, and that it was not too late to start. I like to think he started. The letter says he meant to. I never saw him again, and I never learned whether the boy who could not be trusted at a party grew into a man who could be trusted with a bridge. But I stood my post that night, and I held the line, and I did not lift a hand, and a whole nation watched a soldier who would not be moved teach a lesson no blow could have taught. That is honor. It does not shout, and it does not strike, and it does not need to. It only stands where it is placed and holds, and lets the truth do the rest. And the truth, I have found, is never in a hurry, but it always arrives.